This will be a brief overview of ethics and social responsibility. Ethics, basically, is the moral code of principles defined within an organization in terms of how it views standards of good versus bad, right versus wrong in one's conduct. Interesting, we're not always faced with issues that are so black and white, right versus wrong. Very often we find shades of gray, where or it could be right versus right, and then you have to pick what's the better right for that particular organization. That's where these ethical behavioral codes or values come in. This is what's accepted as good in the right context of the governance of your particular organization, often referred to as the code of ethics. The word value and the word ethics are often used interchangeably. In general, ethics is viewed at the industry level, and values is viewed at the organizational level. Clearly, there is an influence of legal issues as well as value concepts on ethical behavior. Legal is not always necessarily equivalent to ethical, and personal values could certainly help determine for each individual what ethical behavior is. And values, these underlying beliefs and attitudes that help influence individual behavior. Values could be what inform people how to act within an organization. There are two different types of values. There's terminal values, which is about your desired ends, and there are instrumental values, which are preferences regarding the means to the desired ends. There are ideologies that govern ethics and values in people as well. So you have, the moral view about fundamental human rights. You have individualistic views, which is to promote self-interest. You have the justice view, which is about, fairness and impartiality. And then there's the utilitarian view, which is, what's the greatest good for the most people. These don't necessarily all work together well, and you have to sort of find the medium for your organization. Then there's views around truth and culture. So if you're one that comes from a cultural relativism perspective, you would see no specific culture as superior to another, whereas the moral absolute view would be that there are certain truths that are universal. And there's ethical frameworks to kind of work through, and how this works with personal values. The situation that you happen to be in, the environment that you're working in, industry-wide, the organizational ethics, the personal ethics, and how things like honesty, courage, fairness, integrity, self-respect, how these things are defined within an organization, because even these words can have different meanings from institution to institution. So a good framework is to really think these things through and ask yourself the questions, get the facts, identify what your options are, consider any legal implications, look at things like company policies and guidelines, understand who is affected by decisions or any of the stakeholders that are involved or potentially impacted. Testing all actions against your company values, and also thinking about how are you going to feel once you make a decision. How are you going to look back on this when you look at yourself in the mirror, whether it be as an individual or as an organization. Folks can rationalize unethical behavior if they say, well, it's really not illegal, or, it seems like it's in everyone's best interests, or who's going to know, or the organization will back me up. So certainly you have those things that get in the way in terms of rationalizations. But organizations need to have in place ways for folks to expose any misdeeds or breaches in ethical behavior, oftentimes referred to as whistleblowers. There's the Whistleblower Protection Act of 1989, which was put in place. There are some variations from state to state, but in a sense, it protects people from pointing out behavior that is unethical. And, again, people can look the other way because they may look around and see leadership as not coming across ethically, or peers, or not believing that any action will be taken if they stand up, or fear that they're going to be identified or labeled. Oftentimes there's a strict chain of command, so if the person who's the person with the unethical behavior might be, say, a supervisor, but you have to go through that supervisor, so that obviously would create a barrier. Policies themselves can get in the way, or if it's hard to actually see the right versus the wrong because of the ambiguity on how organizations prioritize. There's a lot of things that could mess with high-level ethical behavior. Companies do try to address this. They do have ethics training programs that are available. And, most organizations have a fairly formal, communicated set of ethics, again called the Code of Ethics, which sets the tone and explains the behavioral expectations within the organization. A little bit on stakeholders. These are the people or groups that hold a stake in the organization's performance. Their power, as it pertains to the organization, must be sort of understood in terms of their potential positive or negative effect on the organization. You also should be looking at the validity and legitimacy of the stakeholders' interest in the organization and what they want from the organization. And also, if they have any specific issue, how urgent is it and what kind of attention does it need? Does it need immediate attention? So things to consider about your stakeholders, and there are many of them. You have stockholders, employees, you have governments, educational institutions, suppliers, legal institutions, financial institutions, customers, labor unions, public interest groups, the future, whether it be future employees or future generations or customers of the firm. All of these fall into the potential stakeholders of an organization. Also related to ethics is the idea of social responsibility, and looking through issues and governance around these issues at the organizational level, and how the organization serves its own interests and the interests of society at large. Is there the level of stewardship? Do organizations take personal responsibility for the interests of society? What is their view on things like sustainability for present and future generations, whether it be waste avoidance or recycling or uses of alternative energy? This is often referred to as the triple bottom line, or the 3 Ps of profit, people, and planet. Different ways, strategies, or ways people can look at this within organizations, from the very, very proactive view to taking leadership on issues such as these, versus maybe doing what's minimally required, or even obstructing movement, or just doing the basic, ethically, legally required things. So there's a lot of perspectives and reasons why companies would gravitate to any one of these approaches. Now, surveys that have been done, this one in particular, it's on the screen now, talks about how 2,200 workers saw that the results that were found from this survey was that when companies set high ethical standards, employees responded with a greater work commitment, loyalty, and enthusiasm for their position, and indeed that satisfaction led to more ethical behavior. Also, another survey showed that 60% of people who saw or knew about an unethical conduct said they didn't feel comfortable reporting it for fear of reprisal or retaliation. So to sum up, in order to set ethics and social responsibility throughout an organization, to be open and transparent workplace, it must allow everyone to perform their duties with honesty and integrity, to be able to report illegal behavior and comply with industry laws, to be able to prioritize a hospitable and respectful workplace for everybody, to allow for the disclosure, somebody to recuse themselves or to liberate on an issue if they are personally involved in a potential conflict of interest. Everyone should be able to report conflicts of interest and other ethical concerns, up the chain of command through supervisors or whatever method is defined within the organization. And of course, they must, ensure that there's no retaliation. And that's all we're going to talk about for now, and we'll cover the rest when we get into class.